Please welcome best-selling author, award-winning broadcaster, winner of the 1959 Stephen Leacock Medal for Humor, Companion of the Order of Canada, and marijuana connoisseur, Mr. Pierre Burton.
Hi, I'm Pierre Burton. Looking back on my career, you know, I cannot count the number of times a young man or a young woman has come up to me and said, "Hey, Mr. Burton, what's the best way to roll a joint?" Well, let me tell you, it's not that way. Put that down and we'll start over. First of all, you need a good rolling surface. May I suggest either the National Green or my latest book, Prisoners of the North. Avoiding novelty or colored paper, I prefer white paper to add to your mix. And being in Ontario, we always use hydroponic. So be sure to remove any twigs and seeds. Now, the way you distribute the mix will determine the shape of your joint. I prefer the classic cone-shaped joint, what the young people call a coner. Now for the tricky bit. Pick everything up, start in the middle, roll outwards, and let your thumbs do most of the work. And when you have an even consistency, wrap the excess paper around the joint, wet the paper, and seal the joint. Excellent. Firm, but not too firm. Just the way I like it. And remember, Canada, it's the loose joints that tend to fall apart, leaving unsightly toque burns on your chairs or on your bow tie. It's a tragedy we all want to avoid, don't we? I'm Pierre Burton, and that's how to roll a joint.
So I take it you all know who Pierre Burton was? Yeah. He was, at the time, really the giant of Canadian journalism, the best-selling author, the best-selling popularizer of Canadian history. At the time, also, you can tell he was already a little infirm, but had the wit, the humor to do that video. It's also important to remember that when he did that video, what he did was entirely illegal. So, in this cluster of speakers, we have 6 to regale you, and that's the largest number of speakers we've ever had in a single pod. So, I am going to curtail my own remarks and let the industry speak for itself as it emerges from the politics and the ignorance and the stigma of the past. We've gathered a selection of dreamers and schemers and doers, each with their own proposed piece of the puzzle and each of them with their eye on the prize. In the cluster, we're going to offer you an attorney who has become a licensed producer, 2 doctors, one concerned with the practicalities of marijuana in the workplace and the other pursuing the theoretical use of cannabis for radical life extension. Excuse me. Then we feature a sophisticated communicator who has launched a premium brand that embraces and highlights cannabis culture in a variety of activities. After that, a brother and sister act who are coming at it through cooking. Then an activist and a hustler who's about to open a cafe with a difference. And finally, we close with one of the 2 big kahunas in the pot business in Canada, Aurora, who represents the legitimization of cannabis as a vehicle for Bay Street and hedge fund participation. So, from grow up to retail, from treating pain and nausea to pursuing radical longevity, these are some of the fascinating new faces of marijuana. Who's first? Welcome, Mr. Fowler.
Oh, walking away already. I guess we'll just jump right in. First of all, thank you for having me. I've been following this event for quite some time, and when I was offered the opportunity to come here and speak, I actually spent a lot of time thinking about what I would say first. What do you say in a room like this when you're basically a pot guy? I thought about it long and hard. It actually took me quite a while, and I realized at the end of it, the only thing that I could open with that would be authentic to who I am and why I do what I do every day is to come here and say, my name is John, and I love cannabis. It makes you laugh. That's interesting. What's interesting for me is I don't just like to do cannabis, which I do. I like everything cannabis represents. It's a beautiful plant used by beautiful people and has a beautiful culture around it. It represents one of the greatest social and economic opportunities of our time, and the success of businesses like mine recently demonstrate that. The reason for that is cannabis is a beautiful intoxicant. As a culture, we use intoxicants all throughout our life. We use caffeine, we use alcohol, we use other things. I certainly know without alcohol, I don't think there's a woman I ever would have talked to in my entire life. So these play a very important role. Cannabis offers an ability to have an intoxicant that allows many of the benefits of those others, but at the same time allows something better. It allows us to make deeper connections with those around us, deeper connections with our loved ones, more intimate connections, all while making a healthier choice. It allows us to enjoy music more. It allows us to eat food that tastes better. It allows us to have sex that feels better, and again, is healthier than our other options. I think that's pretty darn fantastic. But cannabis also is a beautiful medicine, and for most of my 15-year career, I've been working with medical patients trying to allow them access to this simple plant to feel better. You're gonna hear from some companies today about the wonderful advances that cannabis medicine is making. I've been fortunate to travel around the world and go to places like Israel and Europe where they're fighting cancer cells in petri dishes, where they're treating diseases like autism. But I think what crystallized it for me was what we saw over the last week with a young child in the United Kingdom who was suffering with epilepsy. His government didn't allow him access to a simple cannabis oil, a few drops a day that treated his condition. And what was beautiful was the social outcry from that. Around the world, people tweeted, raised their voice, wrote letters, spoke, newspapers ran articles, and it showed that if you care, you can make change because the Home Office allowed him to have access to his cannabis. That event, that social event, may actually be the watershed moment in providing millions of citizens of the United Kingdom with access to medical cannabis. I think that's fantastic. But if that's not enough, cannabis also offers a beautiful wellness benefit. You know, the aches, the pains, the stresses, the anxieties, the mindfulness, those little things we need to help us get through our day or finish after a hard day, cannabis can do that as well. In fact, I often find myself having to stop and not talk about all the things that I think cannabis can do for people because you don't want to come across as a snake oil salesman. So you think here, I've come here, 15 years in the space, things are looking pretty good. We had a big, important day today, which I'll talk about. But I can tell you, my time in this industry has not always been this way. I like to chart my corporate history or my professional history on what I call the mom index. This is the stock chart of how my mother feels about me. You can see at the beginning, it didn't start out very good. When I started as a teenager in this space, I was connecting patients, doctors, and growers and trying to operate really early days in this industry to help people find relief through primarily dried flower cannabis. Effectively, that made me the pot guy at home, and it really wasn't doing me any favors. There's some very aggressive nods. I guess some of those pot guys are in the room. I realized, though, that to have a career and to really shape this industry, which I wanted to do, I wasn't going to do it being one of many talented growers. I don't even know if I was that talented, to be honest. I thought I would do this by going to be a lawyer. So our industry, for those who don't know, is shaped by a small number of lawyers and a small number of very brave clients, many of whom I'm lucky to call my friends, who said no to government prohibition and said, I need to use medical cannabis to feel better, and fought those fights. So after graduating near the top of my class at U of T and then acing my law school exams, I made a big mistake and I put cannabis on my cover letter, and I only got into one school. What's interesting is 10 years later, that same school has a cannabis curriculum, and I actually think that we're going to see cannabis courses across all professions and all jurisdictions as people realize the huge opportunity that this represents globally, but specifically the opportunity for Canadians to be leaders. As you see the chart moving up, I graduated, I did well, I got a good job on Bay Street, I was going to be a suit and tie lawyer. Mom was very happy. And then I got a call in November of 2014 offering me 24 hours to quit my job and run a cannabis company I had started in 2013. For me, it took me somewhere between 1, maybe 2 seconds to decide that I was going to run down the hall and quit. For my mom, I think it took her a lot longer for the blood pressure to come back to normal. This was an unfunded, unlicensed, publicly traded cannabis startup long before it was cool to do so. If you look at the chart, we call this the reprice of the mom index. But since then, I think things have been pretty good. So for the last 24 months, cannabis has been on the tip of this nation's tongue. We've seen more media coverage for cannabis than almost any other industry. Business has been good, investment has been flowing. So now you're thinking, this guy's come here to brag. But not the case. I'm come here because I'm concerned. I'm concerned that legalization, a monumental political event that happened literally today, has a big risk of failure. And I don't think legalization is at risk of failure because there's anything wrong with the cannabis plant. I actually think it's darn near perfect. And I don't think any legalization is at risk of failure due to a lack of demand. Canadians like cannabis more than any other country in the world. 4 million Canadians or more every year choose to spend as much as $10 billion doing something that was illegal. But I think legalization is going to fail because of those stigmas that Moses was talking about at the beginning that continue to persist in our legal industry. But first, quickly, what is success? Success is a different thing to many people. To activists, many of whom are in the room, who I've worked with for 15 years, it's about freedom of choice and recognizing that the harms of prohibition were vastly greater than the harms of cannabis itself. For others, it's the huge economic opportunity of a global industry that could well be north of $100 billion. To the government, a little less sexy. It's about restricting access to youth. It's about keeping cannabis out of the hands of organized crime, and it's about a regulated and taxed supply chain. But to me, there's only one definition that works, and that's will Canadian consumers choose legal cannabis? Prohibition failed because it was a supply-side response to what essentially was a demand issue. Canadians wanted cannabis, and we criminalized their way to get there. And what do we have? We have a $10 billion illicit market. To be successful, we can legalize the supply chain, but again, it's a demand issue. If we are going to be successful, we must have Canadians choose legal cannabis, and we must do that by being better as companies. Now, I do want to say for those who have been living under some sort of rock for the last week, legalization did happen, and interesting enough, it did happen today. Cannabis received royal assent, and on October 17th, you'll be able to walk into a store pretty much nationwide, buy cannabis, take that home, and enjoy that, and I think that is fantastic. Over the last... As you can see, my staff are pretty excited about this as well. But the problem is, as a paradigm shift and as a consumer revolution, unless we do better, unless we produce products that people want to buy, and we produce a quality and price points that people are willing to give us their hard-earned money, cannabis legalization is going to fail. And that begs the question, then where are we going wrong? And I think this comes from the history of how we've gotten here. Cannabis was illegal for essentially a century in this country. It started from very racist and negative ways, and that has persisted through over the last 100 years. As we had our medical program created by those great lawyers and those brave patients, again, it was the most narrow carve-out the government could give to satisfy what judges told them they had to do. Then along came our conservative government, who saw a growing gray market for cannabis and decided to crush it. And they did that by creating commercial cannabis. Now, as an aside, when they write the book of cannabis history and they decide whose face is going to be there as potentially the most important human being in creating legal cannabis, interestingly enough, I think that face is Stephen Harper. Now, I don't think he's going to like that, but I do think that is correct, because his attempt to control and commercialize the supply chain leads to everything that we've been doing today and the companies that are being built across this country. But the problem is that stigma persists in our regulations and legalizations that are actually increasing penalties for many cannabis crimes, that create problems for entrepreneurs trying to get in the space, that don't include amnesty, and that still treat cannabis like a radioactive substance, even though it's a relatively benign plant. Unfortunately, that stigma as well has come into the entrepreneurs who are in this space, many of whom sense the great business opportunity, but don't truly engage with the passion of the plant. They don't truly respect the consumer, and they've offered a world where quality hasn't become the primary driver of business. For the first 10 years of my career, it was all about this. It was about the plant, the beautiful, complex aromas that come from that, what it can do for you, how it makes you feel, and how this can be moved around the country. But in the last few years, it's become about this. We've turned our beautiful plant into a commodity. We've decided that lowest cost is going to win, and we've promised investors and regulators a world where new ways of doing cannabis, aided by technology not yet invented, is going to change the way we associate with a plant that we've been using for centuries. Fundamentally, we forget that cannabis at its core, legal or otherwise, is a consumer packaged good. At the end of the day, we have to have consumers who choose to want to buy our product. Prohibition failed for 100 years to stop people from buying illicit cannabis. I don't believe it's going to work starting on the 18th of October. But the beauty is, with a CPG, we have two important guides right in the name. The last one is good. I think products have to be good if people are going to buy them. And the first one is the consumer. We always have to remember to put the consumer first. So this begs the question then, what can we do as an industry? I think there's many things we can do as an industry as we build our companies and our products and our brands, but fundamentally as an industry, we must stop by dropping the stigma that we have. I can't tell you how many times I've been to meetings, whether it's with other industry executives or investors or regulators, where inevitably there's a laugh track in the middle of it. I don't think that happens with beverage alcohol. I don't think that happens in other VC meetings. I think that that's a driver of stigma. I also meet executives in this space who go out of their way to tell me within 30 seconds of meeting me that they don't use cannabis and they never use cannabis. With that stigma in mind, I struggle to see how our industry will succeed. To be successful, we need to be able to say, I love cannabis. It's okay. To be successful, we need to embrace the beauty of the plant and the complexity of the people that use it and understand how we can connect with them to have them transition from the illicit market to the legal market. It starts with the #1 risk, and that's producing better cannabis. The Canadian illicit market for cannabis produces some of the greatest cannabis in the entire world, bar none. That is a very challenging competitor. As industry, we have tools being legal with investment, with science, with research, with infrastructure where we should be able to do better. Quite frankly, if I cannot produce with my current company cannabis that is better than what I did at 20 years old in a garage, I can't tell you the location, but in that garage, then I should probably give every dollar back to shareholders now, as should every other company in the space. But it's a challenging question to understand how to do better. It starts with picking genetics that prioritize flavor and aroma over yield. It involves growing the plants in a way that costs a little bit more money to produce a better product, to produce the flower or the bud that Canadian consumers are looking for. It requires finishing the flowers properly to remove the leaves. Those little leaves that are left on it, they create what we call a green leaf volatile. That's that grassy smell that nobody likes. And we have to age our product. This is a fundamental step in producing good flower. Now, if you don't know cannabis, you'd be forgiven for not understanding the importance of this, but if I came to you with a great business idea to create high-quality, low-cost whiskey by going right from the still to the bottle and skipping that annoying barrel step, you'd rightfully tell me to take my moonshine and go. This is a beautiful thing. This is a beautiful, complex product, and I think we need the vision to produce it, and we need the confidence that the consumers will want it. If you look at the California wine industry, which is known for its quality, this was driven by a few visionary entrepreneurs who had the confidence to produce better wine and the trust that consumers would buy it. We need to do the same with cannabis. We've created essentially a national shortage of alcohol and responded by predominantly producing a whole lot of malt liquor. And the problem is that that malt liquor doesn't sell. The response is going to be, well, it just has to be cheaper. I would submit that if we want to be successful in legalization, we have to do better. Technical benefits, though, are not going to be sufficient. We need to find ways to communicate those consumers. At the end of the day, we buy products because we feel they'll be better for us, not because they're technically superior. These functional benefits need to be communicated. In beverage alcohol, we have Wine Spectator and Whiskey Bible and guys like Robert Parker. In cannabis, we need to invent these. This is Pete Shearer, a friend of mine, who developed the Shearer grading scale, which is a way of communicating quality to consumers. Having that conversation, empowering the consumer to make better choices will allow them to choose better cannabis. And once they do that, it's hard to go backwards. Like beverage alcohol, as you try better wine and spirits, it's hard to go back to what you had before. But most importantly, we have to learn to love cannabis. We have to create brands that are authentic and that speak directly to consumers. Fundamentally, a brand is a promise, and we have to understand what our products can deliver and what they cannot, and we have to be honest about that. When I look at some of the speakers today and I look at some of the great brands that have been built in the cannabis group and the other speakers over this weekend, I think two things are common to all these brands. One is a relentless focus on what the brand does, and two is an equally relentless focus on the consumer. When you do that, you'll be successful and money will follow. As an industry, we have to do the same thing and focus on the consumer and focus on real authenticity in our brands. And that's the beauty of it. Change literally can start today. So I don't want to come across as a doomsayer, and I don't want to take anything away from the immensely exciting thing that happened today when, with the stroke of a pen, cannabis became legal in this country. I don't want to take anything away from what's going to happen on October 17th, when each of you can walk into a store proudly and purchase cannabis. Even if you don't like cannabis, I think you should, because that's a global event and that's very exciting. But as an industry, we need to drop our stigma and we need to learn to love the plant and love everything about the people that use it if we hope to be successful. When I first heard about legal commercial cannabis in 2014, I was excited. As a consumer, I felt that over the next few years, with investment and research and all of these great things, the quality of cannabis would go to something I had never seen before. I just assumed this to be true. Unfortunately, this hasn't been the case. Unfortunately, we've created an industry that, rather than engaging with this plant and with its people, has used stigma to create cost competition and commoditization. And quite frankly, in a country like Canada, with a competitor like the illicit market, if we do not do better, we will not succeed. So yes, the law will pass, and yes, on October 17th, you'll have the opportunity to buy cannabis in a store. But if success is driven by converting the illicit market to the legal market, we will only be able to do that if we do better. My name is John Fowler. I'm the CEO of the Supreme Cannabis Company, and I love cannabis. And I really hope you all can learn to love cannabis too.